A guy walks into the human resources department of a large company and hands the executive his application. The executive begins to scan the sheet and sees that the applicant has been fired from every job he has ever held. "I have to say," says the executive, "your work history is awful. You've been terminated from every job." "Yes," says the man. "Well," continues the executive, "there isn't much positive about that." "Sure there is," says the applicant. "I'm not a quitter." A man's mother-in-law was dying, and she asked for one last favor. She said, "I will be dying soon, so I'd like you to put all my prized possessions in the attic, so that when I die, my spirit can grab the items as I ascend to heaven." The man and his wife obliged, and when the mother-in-law passed a few days later, the daughter and son-in-law ran up to the attic to see if she managed to take her belongings. The attic was still full of all the possessions they put there. The man shook his head and said, "I knew we should have put them all in the basement." When I was in college, I met this girl who was from Michigan, and we became so intimately close, but in a friendly, platonic kind of way. I was from Florida, so I knew nothing about cold weather. As the weather started to get colder, she took me out shopping and picked out clothes for me. We became closer and closer, of course always treating each other as friends, but everybody could see that we felt a lot more for each other. Everyone in our dorm would talk about it when we weren't around. Will they or won't they? The connection between us was so strong that we could finish each other's sentences, and sometimes we didn't even need to exchange a word. We just knew what each other was thinking. Unfortunately, the one thing we couldn't communicate about was the feelings we had for each other. Then, after the semester was almost over, she was talking about how beautiful the winter was up in Michigan. I was still struggling to deal with the colder weather, and driving all the way up to Michigan meant things getting even colder. But I didn't care because I knew the cold would mean chances for us to get closer. So instead of me going home for winter break, we decided I would drive her home to Michigan. There wasn't any snow on the roads yet, but after a few hours it was getting noticeably colder outside, and the only vent that seemed to work in my car was in the very middle. So we both keep putting our hands in the middle of the car, and our hands kept touching by accident. At this point, she hadn't said a word to me of her intentions, even though it was so painfully obvious when looking back how much she wanted me and how much I wanted her. But neither of us had the courage to just come out and say it. Finally, as we crossed the border and into Michigan, and I was starting to get some cramps from sitting so long, I adjusted my position, and my right arm just sort of fell across her thigh. I could feel her trembling at the touch, but I thought at first it was just from the cold. My mind is racing as I was thinking, "Oh my God, I'm actually touching her leg. Is she going to freak out? What is she going to say? Am I ruining our friendship?" But she didn't say a word. I was so terrified that the moment may end when she realized where my hand was. I stayed completely motionless. As we passed Detroit and were getting close to her hometown, she started shifting around in her seat, and it caused my hand to slide up her thigh. I remember my heart pounding, wondering how she was going to react, but she just seemed like she was sleeping. Finally, as we neared her exit, she just sort of leaned over on my shoulder. With that, my hand slid even higher up her thigh. My entire arm was trembling and I could feel her warmth. Then she whispered in my ear, "You know, you can keep going further if you want." So I drove to Canada. A lady goes into a bar and sees a cowboy with his feet propped up on a table. He has the biggest feet she's ever seen. The woman coyly asks the cowboy if what they say about men with big feet is true. The cowboy replies, "Sure is, mister. Why don't you come back to my place and let me prove it?" The woman is curious, so she spends the night with him. When she sees him the next day, she hands the cowboy a $100 bill. "I'm flattered," he says, grinning. "You must have really enjoyed me." Not so much, the woman replies. Take the money and go buy yourself some smaller boots. The priest in a small Irish village loved the rooster and 10 hens he kept in the henhouse behind the church. Sunday morning, before Mass, he went to feed the birds and discovered that the rooster was missing. He knew about cockfights in the village, so he questioned his parishioners in church during Mass. He asked the congregation, "Has anybody got a rooster?" All the men stood up. No, he said, that wasn't what I meant. Has anybody seen a rooster? All the women stood up. No, he said, that wasn't what I meant. Has anybody seen a rooster that doesn't belong to them? Half the women stood up. No, he said, that wasn't what I meant. Has anybody seen my 16 altar boys? 2 priests and a goat stood up. The life of a widow. A successful rancher died and left everything to his devoted wife. She was a very good-looking woman and determined to keep the ranch, but knew very little about ranching, so she decided to place an ad in the newspaper for a ranch hand. 2 cowboys applied for the job. One was gay and the other a drunk. She thought long and hard about it, and when no one else applied, she decided to hire the gay guy, figuring it would be safer to have him around the house than the drunk. He proved to be a hard worker who put in long hours every day and knew a lot about ranching. For weeks, the 2 of them worked, and the ranch was doing very well. Then one day, the rancher's widow said to the hired hand, "You have done a really good job, and the ranch looks great. You should go into town and kick up your heels." The hired hand readily agreed and went into town one Saturday night. 1 o'clock came, however, and he didn't return. 2 o'clock, and no hired hand. Finally, he returned around 2:30, and upon entering the room he found the rancher's widow sitting by the fireplace with a glass of wine waiting for him. She quietly called him over to her. "Unbutton my blouse and take it off," she said. Trembling, he did as she directed. "Now take off my boots." He did as she asked, ever so slowly. "Now take off my socks." He removed each gently and placed them neatly by her boots. "Now take off my skirt." He slowly unbuttoned it, constantly watching her eyes in the firelight. "Now take off my bra." Again, with trembling hands, he did as he was told and dropped it to the floor. Then she looked at him and said, "If you ever wear my clothes into town again, you're fired."